Hey, David, let's talk about white privilege. Do poor white people have the same privilege as rich white people? I'm going to answer the question. It's not a hugely relevant one because the question of privilege is better suited for if you want to look at racial privilege, you need to really look at it where as many other variables as possible are held equal so that you're really just looking at the variable of race. So the question of whether a rich white person has more or less privilege than a poor white person is a fine question to ask. The answer is easy. A poor white person has far less privilege than a rich white person. I mean, there's the question. That's your answer. It's not a very interesting question because it doesn't really relate to the problems we're trying to deal with in society. If everything other than skin color is the same, then we can look at the specific effect of skin color as a factor. And when you do that, if you imagine a poor white person and a poor black person, if the only difference is race, then there is some degree of white privilege that the poor white person has over the poor black person. And in fact, there are some really interesting studies with regard to employment where they were for jobs were open, low skilled jobs, whatever. I think some were housekeeping, custodial type work, other low skilled jobs. And really big studies were done with thousands of resumes with identical skills. Names were different. Traditionally white sounding names versus traditionally black sounding names were sent out and the response rates were tracked. And sometimes the white sounding name with the same credentials as the black sounding name would get as much as a 50% higher callback or interview rate. So that's an example. We're looking at low skilled jobs. You're not talking about wealthy people or even upper middle class or middle class people. And you see that there is a specific difference when varying only names that imply a certain race. Okay, that's interesting to look at. Poor white versus rich white. Of course, wealth confers privilege and wealth confers advantage. Now, I think it's also important to talk about the reality that at a certain level of wealth, wealth can start to override the lack of privilege that might come from some other factor, like race or nationality or religion or gender or whatever, right? There would be a certain point at which one is so wealthy that regardless of their race, they are going to have privilege in society that will mostly make up for a characteristic that would typically confer a disadvantage. So the question is a fine one if you are sort of getting at the privilege that wealth confers. But from the point of view of thinking about, okay, poor white people and poor black people might live in different neighborhoods. One of those neighborhoods might be better connected with public transit. That would be a form of privilege that would relate to race that would not necessarily be obviously visible unless you really try to fine tune and equate all but one variable, isolate one variable and try to figure out the differences there. That's my thought. White privilege is different based on wealth, but it's not a particularly interesting question since we know, particularly in this country, wealth confers a ton of privilege. If I've misunderstood your question or you disagree with my answer, by all means, let me know. We've got a great bonus show planned for you today. The bonus show is for members and patrons. Members and patrons. Become a member at joinpakman.com or become a patron at patreon.com/David Pakman Show.